This brings us to Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn. This image that you're looking at here is something that I've repeatedly come across on right-wing image boards. They repeatedly stress the fact that Solzhenitsyn won the Nobel Prize, sometimes falsely crediting him with having won the Nobel Peace Prize, when in reality he was a laureate of the Nobel Prize of Literature in 1970. And yet, having called out Bolsheviks as being Jews. Let's read the quote. So the quote goes as follows. "You must understand, the leading Bolsheviks who took over Russia were not Russians. They hated Russians. They hated Christians. Driven by ethnic hatred, they tortured and slaughtered millions of Russians without a shred of human remorse. It cannot be overstated. Bolshevism committed the greatest human slaughter of all time. The fact that most of the world is ignorant and uncaring about this enormous crime is proof that the global media is in the hands of the perpetrators." However, as usual, the far right are world champions in creating hoax quotations. Because this quote is not something that Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn said. Its origin traces back to our PhD historian, and I'm going to get to that later, Dr. David Duke, former Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, who attempted to make capital out of Solzhenitsyn's work by publishing a book in 2013 titled The Secret Behind Communism. His book introduction contains the above quote, which he attributes to Solzhenitsyn on the occasion of a meeting he had with the Nobel laureate in 2002. Of course, we just have to take the good man at his good word and just believe him that Solzhenitsyn whispered those words into his ear, because no other proof is offered. So this hoax quote, spread thousands and thousands of times on right-wing forums, sets the scene for Duke's elaborate thesis, which posits that the Soviet regime was effectively being the instrument of Jewry's vengeance against the Russian and Ukrainian people. David Duke argues that the deaths of millions of Orthodox Christians at the hands of a Jewish-led government was a crime unparalleled in history, and that the Holodomor, during which anywhere from 5 to 8 million people in Ukraine starved to death, was part of a state-sponsored policy aimed at diminishing Ukrainian nationalist sentiment and, as Duke states, a tragedy which not only rivals that of the later Holocaust, but in fact surpasses it. You see where he's getting at? David Duke's idea, therefore, is to change the nature of the discourse from what he considers to be the defensive posture imposed on Gentiles by organized Jewry in regard to the issue of the Holocaust and Jewish accusations of Gentile complicity and inaction, into one where Jews are accused of perpetrating mass genocide on Gentiles. David Duke is also keen to claim Lazar Kaganovich, an ethnic Jew, as having had the key role as overseer of the Ukrainian policy. Kaganovich is, to David Duke, surpassed in genocidal culpability by Genrikh Yagoda. That Yagoda, a man who cultivated a distinct mustache identical to that of Adolf Hitler's, is not known to the wider public as a mass murderer, and that is as telling to David Duke as is the lack of public consciousness about the Holodomor. But these are references to Solzhenitsyn's work made by those who have fallen out of the spectrum of contemporary historical orthodoxies due to their race-based political and social standpoints, aka fact-twisting revisionists with a clear agenda of their own. Solzhenitsyn's views and his book had motives clearly divergent from those intended by those advocating the white nationalist cause. For instance, while the far-right revisionist view postulates a Jewish conspiracy in the early 20th century upheavals in Russia, Solzhenitsyn was categorical in his explanation that the Jews were not the orchestrators of the revolutions of 1905 and 1917. And of the latter event, he clearly stated that one layer rushed headfirst to the revolution, while another, to the contrary, was trying to stand back. At the end of the 9th chapter, Solzhenitsyn denounces the superstitious faith in the historical potency of conspiracies by which Jews have been attributed responsibility, while ignoring Russian failings that determined our sad historical decline. Another clear distinction between Solzhenitsyn and revisionists is his berating of the White Russians, that is to say, the supporters of the Tsarist ancien regime, for condoning violence directed at Jews in general, as opposed to only those Jews who were combatants in the ensuing civil war. Yet another key point of distinction between Solzhenitsyn and revisionists such as David Duke is the interpretation of the Holodomor. Unlike white nationalists, Solzhenitsyn does not posit this event as a racial massacre of a Christian people by vengeful atheistic Jews. While acknowledging it as an exceptional tragedy, he fits it into the overall context as a calamity which was the byproduct of the ruthless Bolshevik decrees geared towards fulfilling grain procurements. For Solzhenitsyn, the idea of the Holodomor having been a policy of deliberate genocide is an act of historic revisionism. The Ukrainian tragedy, in his view, was not different from the Russian famine of 1921, which occurred a full 11 years before the Holodomor, which happened in 1932. And just trying to Google images of the Russian famine of 1921 to 22, you will also find this image. And the source is the Daily Mail, and you can see that it says, "This photo taken in 1921 shows a family stricken by famine in the Volga region in Russia during the Russian Civil War." Now this brings us back to the photo that PhD historian Dr. David Duke uses to illustrate the Holodomor. And as you can see, he has taken a photo that isn't even from the Holodomor, but from the Russian famine of 1921. What a freaking moron. This leaves us with one more thing, and that is the PhD title that David Duke got, making him a doctor. As I said earlier, I'm going to come back to it later. You see, in September 2005, Duke received a PhD in history from a Ukrainian private university called Interregional Academy of Personnel Management, abbreviated MAUP, an institution that has been described by the Anti-Defamation League as a university of hate. Make of that what you will. Duke's doctoral thesis was titled Zionism as a Form of Ethnic Supremacism. However, the PhD program of MAUP was not accredited by the Higher Attestation Commission of Ukraine and is not accredited by this state body's successor, the Ministry of Education and Science of Ukraine, so the PhD diplomas issued by the MAUP are not recognized by the Ukrainian state as academic degrees. The ADL maintains the MAUP as a main source of anti-Semitic publishing in Ukraine, and its anti-Semitic actions have been strongly condemned by Foreign Ministers Boris Tarashchuk and various organizations. Duke has also taught a course on international relations and a history course at MAUP. On his website, Duke now refers to himself as a Dr. David Duke, PhD. I'm laughing because it is a meme degree. Which finally leads us to the last point, and that is, what about the Holodomor? Is it really a Holocaust of its own? I'm going to make that into a different video, because this one's getting long enough, so while that still remains on my schedule, I have a more important video to make. Now, this video did not manage to answer one question. The elephant in the room. Were the Bolsheviks really majority Jewish? Was the Bolshevik Revolution really a Jewish revolution? Were the Bolsheviks Jews? And to tackle that subject, I'm going to need to make a much longer video where I debunk the notion that Bolshevism is Judaism and that Jewish Bolshevism is some kind of secret that has been guarded from the Gentiles for almost a century. Stay tuned for that video.